Hi guys, so we're back with the Losi DBXL. On this one we are going to remove and rebuild the diffs. So in this you've got 3 diffs, there's one in there, you've got centre one somewhere down there, and there's a front one in there. Now the front and rears are the same. The centre one is slightly different. So we're going to show you how to get them out of the car, and then we'll take them to the bench to show you about rebuilding them. Now you're going to rebuild your diff probably every, depending on your usage, perhaps every 6 months, or if you want to change the oils, to change the tuning, you might do it a bit more regular than that. But it is quite a common thing. These do take quite a bashing on these bigger trucks because of the power you put in. So the first job, we're going to remove the body shell and the cage. On this it's quite simple. Basically you've got these little clips. There's 4 on the back, there's 3 on here and 3 on the other side, and then you've got a couple on the front. They're quite easy to remove. Basically I use a pair of pliers, little needle nose pliers, and you can just flip them up. So now you should need to make sure you get the plastic off as well as the body shell. And there is the body shell and frame removed. We've removed the frame and body shell. We have removed the engine and fuel tank, which is here for a good clean. Just makes it easier to be able to see the various components. So what we're going to do, we're going to remove the center diff, we're going to remove the front diff, and we're going to remove the rear diff. The center diff is slightly different, the front and rears are both the same, but we'll remove them, we'll do a rebuild on them, and you can see where we're at. This is quite a few alloy hop-ups on this car. We are in the process of just replacing some of them with some of the standard components, so you may see some bits disappear and appear on the car as I take this to bits and perhaps don't do it on camera, but we'll remove those diffs now so we can see what we've got. So I've just put the car up on a couple of the wheels just to get it off the deck, make it a little bit easier to work on. To remove the rear diff, we've got 2 screws there, and then there's 4 that hold the diff retaining half plastics in. You'll also just need to remove the anti-roll bar link, which makes it easy to pull off. I've just already undone that. So with these 2 screws removed, this then hinges up, and then you then need to remove that screw, that screw, that screw, and that screw. You normally have a retaining clip here for the roll bar. I've actually already taken that off, so that'll make that easy to remove. So we'll just undo these 4 screws. So we've removed these 4 screws. I've already taken the roll bar off. You normally would locate into there, and we'll take these plastic parts off. One last thing I am going to have to do, because on this car I've got upgraded transmission on it. In here, rather than it being the traditional cup and pins, these are actually ball bearings in there, and it's the same in here as well. So when I try and slide this back, I won't have enough clearance. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to remove the top links. It's the quickest way. Remove the top links and then pull the drive shafts, pull the rubber boots off, and just pull the drive shafts back, making sure I don't lose any of the ball bearings that are out of there, that are in there. So I've just removed the top links, and I'm going to slide off the boots and just remove the drive shaft, making sure I don't lose any of the ball bearings. Same on the other side, and it's a very simple process of just pulling the diff case here, just going to push from behind and then it comes out. Literally, all we're going to have to do is undo these three screws here to get to the diff inside. And as you can see on mine, I haven't got the pin, I've got these ball bearings in here, which is an upgrade. So all we'll do, we'll undo these 3 screws to reveal the diff. Now so removing the front diff is almost the same process. We've got 2 screws here, and then we then can get to the 4 retaining diff halves. But there's also 2 screws underneath the car. You may not be able to see that, but there's 2 screws you've got to remove so you can remove this plastic part. So we'll get them off and then we'll get to the diff. So they're the 2 countersunk screws from underneath. We can then just remove these now. To remove these screws, I'm going to take out the diff halves, or the diff retaining parts. I have got the traditional pin and cup on the front here, but they are very difficult actually to get out. Sliding it out, there's not enough movement, it would appear. So I have just removed these top link mounts so I can just pull out the drive shaft, and we'll do the same on the other side. Then the diff just comes forward like that. Now, we've just lost the front retaining bars, but that's not a problem. And then that comes off, and there is our front diff, basically exactly the same as the rear diff. This is the standard one. You say it's got the standard cups on. That's the upgraded one. You can see they're exactly the same, apart from these cups. It's just there's the only difference. So the diffs are interchangeable front and rear if you've got the same specs on them. So we will then take those bolts off there, and we'll work on that. And now we will get the centre diff out. So here is our centre gearbox. First thing we need to do is just remove the brake levers. 2mm grub screws in there. Undo those. They just come away there. We then have 2 longer 3mm screws here. I have already, these were quite tight, but I have actually already just cracked them off just before I put the camera on. That's the long ones. You need to make sure you don't get these mixed up. It'd be pretty difficult. 2 shorter ones for the side nearest to radio box. Need to remove these to be able to get to the sort of center drive shaft. We can then just remove that, and again we've got the upgraded triple ball scenario there. Last 2 bolts, those 2. Then we can lift off. This is an upgraded FID alloy one, which is the top center diff casing. You then have 2 bearing retainers like that, and then the diff should slide out in between your brake pads. If you didn't know, that's the brake disc and the brake pads, and there is your center diff. See, this has got the traditional plastic diff housing. There it is. So we will now come back to the bench with the 3 diffs to have a look at them. So here we have the 3 diffs. First of all, let's have a look at the center one. So first of all, you can remove the brake discs. Have a quick feel what the bearing's like. They feel fine, so there's no problem with them. And it's now a simple case of just undoing these 4 screws there. What I will just do first is just have a quick clean up of here so we don't get any of this rubbish and dirt inside the diff. Screws are undone. It should just come off like that. Got the green sealing gasket, one of the planetary gears, and the 4 little gears in there. I'll just take that. Have a look in there. Now, is there any signs of wear? Not really. Take that gasket off. And there are your 2 sets of centre gears. As standard, this has 50,000 CST oil in it, which is extremely heavy. It needs to be that because of the size of the car. Now, if there was any signs of any wear, if there was like a metallic-y looking paste in here, it means the gears have worn, they've got wear on them. But it's pretty obvious that there's not too much wear in there. You can degrease these, give them a really good clean, and then reassemble it. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to now have a look at these, give them a good clean, and then just inspect for any damage that's not apparent. So we've looked at these gears, they're fine. They're quite thick oil, but there's no obvious damage to those. If you need to remove these gears, basically they are just held on with a pin. There's a pin and a shim. So if you wanted to, just remove that pin, and then your out drive comes off, and then you can take your bearing off. And while we've got that off, we'll just have another feel of that bearing. That feels fine. Clean up some of the worst grease off it, because it doesn't need grease on the outside of that. And that can go back on there. Unlikely to get too much leaking from the oil in these diffs because it is so thick. If you have got leaking, it's obviously going to be probably a faulty, or the gasket's gone, or the plastic's deformed. You'll see on this, it's got a screw in there, which I assume is just for checking or inserting the oil. I think that's an aftermarket thing. I don't like the idea of that, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. So to put this back together, and if you're doing this from new, as we've done there, we've just put the axle back through and it works exactly the same. On this side, it's a little bit more difficult to get that gear out, because obviously it's all the way down there, but you can get it out. Just be careful not to damage any of the gears if you're reusing the gears, or any of the teeth on the gears if you're reusing them. So you can see this has got just a cross pattern on it, and that just sits on there and you'll feel it go home. These just sit on these shafts like so, and you see they've got a slight, there's a flat in the middle there, so the other one sits on it like so. So they basically sit flush. That can go on there like that. The only thing with doing this is you do tend to, particularly when you're rebuilding one, get covered in oil and grease. Try and keep everything as clean as possible. So that's in there. With oil, we obviously put the oil in this part. How much do you put in? Well, I would put enough in. You'll see how thick this oil is. It's almost like a grease almost. It's very very thick, so it's going to take a little bit of time to get in there. So we'll, in fact, what I'm probably going to do, let's take this nozzle off and then we'll just pour it straight in from there. I'll put a good bit in like that. Normally the level we would do, we would just cover the teeth of the gears. Because this oil's so thick, I'm probably not going to put quite that much in. Put a little bit more in. Work it around those gears. So we've got the oil in there. It's covered, almost covered those teeth. It's quite thick, so it's not gone into all the nooks and crannies as yet, but I'm happy with that. There's enough in there. I've then put the green gasket into the recess of the spur gear. Make sure those holes line up, and then we'll just sit that on top of there. You can then just feel it, work it, feel that everything's working okay. If you hold that case tight and push that, you can feel those gears. They'll be very tight. It'll be very difficult to turn them. So that's on. We'll then put the screws back in. It's back together. When you do these screws up, don't over tighten them because you're going into plastic. They just need to be nicely snug. Do them up as if you're doing up a wheel, so you do opposites, so you get it in there nice and square. And if you feel that, we feel very tight, but that feels fine. So that's the process of doing the centre diff. We'll just slip on the brake discs. Again, if they were worn, we'd replace that. And if anything's showing any signs of wear or damage, then we would replace them, but it all looked good. So that's centre diff done. So here is our front or rear diff. This is pretty much standard, with the exception of having the alloy diff casing. This is the standard plastic one, which we just saw on the centre diff. When you take this to bits, make sure you give it a good clean, so you don't want to get any dirt and grit within here. But we can remove this. There will be some oil in here, and sorry, grease in here, which is from where you lubricate the pinion gear, the ring gear and the pinion gear. So we're going to just take off these 4 screws on here to get into the diff. Removed 4 screws, and it lifts off exactly the same as we had for the centre gear. No different, exactly the same. This gear just prizes off like that, and those gears will just pull out again. Because it's the alloy casing, it's obviously just a bit stronger and a bit heavier. Again, just check for any signs of damage, any signs of a grinding powder or a silver paste in here will indicate wear on the diffs. Obviously, if you've got any chipped teeth in there, you need to replace them straight away. Now, a quick look at these, everything looks fine. I'm not going to take all these out because you saw how that happened earlier on in the video. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little bit more oil in this. Now, as standard, they recommend using 30,000 CST. So we'll just put a bit of that in there. It looks, in my mind, looks a bit low. This is going to go in the rear anyway, so I want it a little bit heavier in the rear anyway, so I don't mind putting a little bit more oil in here. Put that in there, just work it around those gears. And I'm simply just going to put this back together. If you wanted, if you were replacing the oil, you need to clean it out with a if you wanted to replace the weight of oil in there, if you want to put a heavier or lighter oil in there, then you want to clean it all out properly and then put the new oil in. As we're putting these screws back in, as they are metal on metal, so as this is going into metal, there's a small possibility that might vibrate loose. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to just put a small, clean these up, and I'm just going to put a small amount of thread lock on these off camera, and then we'll put these in here, tighten these up again, opposites and opposites, tighten them up just so they're just nicely tight, and then that will be that diff done. So the diff's back together. I'm now going to put it back into the casing, and I'm going to re-grease this gear. Now don't be frightened of putting too much grease on here. I'm going to put a little bit more on this before I close the case up, but you want to put a good quality high temperature grease, because these things will get pretty hot, so you want to put a decent amount on there. What you can also do, if you're worried about dirt getting in, you can put a small amount of grease around here to seal it. I'm not going to bother with that because where we run it is not so much of an issue, and we do maintain them pretty well. So the case goes on there, screws back through there, and that then is, we'll check it feels okay, it does, and then that is the front or the rear diffs done, and we'll put them back in the car. So we have a nice rebuilt diff to go back in the car. It's a pretty straightforward point. The only thing might be worth looking at is if your brake pads need replacing. Now's a good time to do it because you can get to them quite easily. But we'll just slip this back in, make sure the discs fit between those pads, and this needs to push down into there like so. We will then put our centre drive shaft on, check that that's all running nicely, and now we can slide on all of these parts. Now the longer screws go through there, shorter ones go through there, then the cap head ones in there. And that's all our screws done up. Do these 4 up first, do them all up loosely tight, then do those 2 up, then snug them all down, and then finally do those 2 up. I've put a little bit of thread lock on them, not too much, just a small amount, just to stop them shaking loose. And then lastly, you can just put through your brake discs, sorry, your braking mechanism through to the grub screws, tighten those grub screws up. And that is the centre diff back in the car. fitting the rear diff back in, straightforward enough. Reverse of what we just done, slide it back in there, and just make sure when you slide it through you locate it into the drive cup, center drive cup. You will see there is actually a couple of locating tags you can see on this one. They just slot into the front of the diff housing. You sort of feel it locate. I'm not going to put the drive shaft in now. I'm going to use it, take the top link off and do it that way. It makes it a little bit easier. So these just slide on there. And then do up these 4 screws. What I'm just going to do is slide off the top links, put the drive shaft back in there, and slide over the boot. And the same on the other side. Next stage, put the anti-roll bar on. Clips that go over there and there. And the last step for the rear is just tuck this down, goes through your red brace and then into the back of the car. So on with the front, same as the back basically. Slide it through there, make sure you locate your center drive shaft in here. Needs to go in there when you push it through. Feel it click home. And on with these parts again. It's actually slightly easier access on the front when I've got this removed. So we've got this on. We've also put the roll bar on with the clips that just go around the front here. You'd normally put the little clips on there. I haven't got them just at hand at the moment. Now we've also just refitted the red brace which came off when we took the gearbox out. Make sure you get these spaces in the right way around. They are labelled front, rear and likes. You'll see the drive shafts over there, but we'll put that back in a minute. And then it's just a case of flipping this round. You've got the 2 bolts for the front which go underneath here, and then the 2 screws go underneath, and then that is the front done. So there we have it. We've done the front gearbox, we've done the rear gearbox, and we've done the center gearbox. All that's left to do now would be to put the obviously engine and that back in, engine and motor, and then put the frame back on, which is pretty straightforward. It just clips onto all these location points that we show you to take it off at the beginning. So I hope you've enjoyed that video and it's been a little bit informative. Leave a comment for anything else you'd like us to do, and please do like, share and subscribe. Thank you very much.